The scrapyard on the moon of Vorth Prime stretched for miles under a pale orange sky. Old ships lay broken and forgotten, their metal bones scattered across the dusty plain. It was a graveyard of dreams, places where machines that once crossed galaxies came to die. Wind blew fine dust through twisted hulls and silent engines. Most who came here were scavengers searching for spare parts or collectors hoping to find something rare. Among them walked a young man named Evan Reed. He wore a faded jacket and carried a small toolkit on his back. His eyes were sharp, always searching, not for what something was, but for what it could become. He wasn't rich or famous. He was just a mechanic who believed that nothing was truly useless if it still existed. Evan had traveled far to reach this scrapyard. He'd heard rumors of a massive alien ship buried somewhere in the western lot, a relic from a war long forgotten. Many had seen it, but none had touched it. They said it was cursed, that it killed every system that tried to scan it. Some said its design was beyond understanding, built by a species that vanished before humans ever reached the stars. When Evan finally found it, he stood in silence for a long time. The ship was half buried under sand and scrap, its hull dark and dented. Strange, smooth patterns ran across its sides, not like paint or panels but more like the texture of skin. The metal looked alive even though it had clearly been dead for centuries. He walked closer, brushing his hand along the hull. The surface felt cold and heavy, but something about it called to him. It wasn't like the other broken ships. It had a kind of presence, like a sleeping giant waiting to wake. The scrapyard owner, an old alien trader named Fenn, laughed when he saw Evan looking at the wreck. "That thing? Worthless," Fenn said, waving one of his 3 hands. "Tried to sell it for decades. Nobody wants it. It's empty inside, just dust and dead tech. The Eliari built it and they're all gone. You'd have better luck fixing a rock." Evan smiled politely. "How much for it?" Fenn squinted, thinking he'd misheard. "You want to buy it? You're joking." "Not joking," Evan said. "How much?" The alien chuckled, shaking his head. "Tell you what, kid. You take it off my lot and I'll call it a favor. Maybe 50 credits. Just enough so I don't feel stupid." Evan didn't even argue. He paid right away. As he signed the ownership code, Fenn muttered under his breath, "Humans. Always thinking they can fix everything." Evan didn't mind. He'd been called worse before. He climbed up the rusted side of the alien ship and peered through a cracked hatch. Inside, darkness swallowed everything. The air smelled dry like burned metal. He turned on a small flashlight and took a cautious step forward. The floor echoed under his boots. The interior was strange. The walls weren't made of plates or beams like normal ships. They flowed together, almost like they had grown instead of been built. He saw wires that looked like veins, broken tubes that pulsed faintly when his light passed over them. Most of the equipment was shattered, but there was something beautiful about the way it had been made, precise, elegant, and full of mystery. He found the bridge after crawling through a half-collapsed passage. The control panels were cracked, but their symbols still glowed faintly when he touched them. He couldn't read the alien language, but his fingers felt warmth under the dust. For a moment he thought he heard a soft hum, just for a second, like the sound of a heartbeat. Maybe it was his imagination. Evan sat on the broken captain's chair, brushing off sand and rust flakes. He took a slow breath. "You don't look so bad," he whispered. "You just need someone to believe in you again." He pulled out his datapad and scanned the main console. The reading came back full of static. No power, no signals, no systems alive. But deep inside the readings there was something odd, a small, constant vibration. Almost like a sleeping system barely alive. It was weak, but it was there. Evan smiled. "You're still breathing," he said softly. "That's enough for me." He climbed back out and started setting up his camp beside the ship. He didn't have much, just a tent, a power cell, and some repair tools. The sky above was filled with dim stars, and the scrapyard stretched endlessly into the distance. Other scavengers stared at him as they passed, shaking their heads. No one stayed near the alien wreck for long. Some said it whispered at night. Others said its shadow made their scanners go dead. But Evan wasn't scared. He spent hours walking around the ship, mapping its structure and noting which parts were still stable. He found strange panels that opened only when he touched them. He found wires that sparked faintly, as if remembering the flow of energy. Each discovery made him more certain. The ship wasn't dead. Just forgotten. That night, he sat by a small fire, eating a meal pack and watching the ship's dark outline. The moon's light glimmered faintly off its hull, making it look almost alive. He thought about all the people who had given up on it, how they had looked and only seen rust. Humans had a strange gift, he thought. They could look at something broken and still imagine it whole. He remembered his old mentor back on Earth who used to tell him, "Machines are like people, Evan. They just need someone to listen to what's wrong." Evan leaned back, eyes on the stars. "Guess I'm listening," he said quietly. As the wind swept through the scrapyard, a faint blue light flickered deep inside the alien ship, just once, barely visible. If Evan had seen it, he would have smiled even wider. Inside the ship, deep in its forgotten circuits, something stirred. A trace of memory. A pulse. A whisper that hadn't spoken for centuries. A single word echoed faintly in the empty halls, though no one was there to hear it. Alive. Evan slept peacefully outside, unaware that his simple act of belief had already changed something ancient. By morning when he woke, the air around the ship felt different, lighter somehow, charged with a soft hum. He placed his hand against the hull again, and this time he swore he felt it breathe. He grinned. "We're going to make you fly again," he said. And though the wind was the only thing that answered, somewhere deep within the ship, a dim pulse glowed like a heartbeat returning to life. The scrapyard was silent, but for the first time in centuries, the alien warship was no longer alone. Evan Reed worked inside the alien ship for days without rest. The air inside was still and dry, carrying the faint smell of dust and metal. Every step he took echoed through empty corridors. He had brought boxes of tools, wires, old batteries, and spare parts from his small workshop. It wasn't much, but he believed it was enough to start something. He began with the outer panels, scraping away years of rust and grime. The alien metal was strange, smooth in some places, sharp in others, and always slightly warm under his hands, even when it should have been cold. He ran scanners over the surface and watched the readings shift in confusing patterns. It didn't behave like normal metal. It seemed to resist being measured, like it had a will of its own. Evan didn't let that bother him. "You're a strange one," he said quietly, patting the wall. "But I've worked with worse." He started pulling out broken circuits and torn cables. The ship's systems were too advanced for his small scanner to understand, so he relied on instinct. He rewired things the way that felt right, connecting alien ports to human-made power couplings. Sometimes sparks flew and smoke filled the room. Sometimes nothing happened at all. But every failure taught him something new. When his tools broke, he fixed them. When a battery ran out, he built a new one from spare parts. He barely slept. He barely ate. He worked until his hands ached and his clothes were covered in black dust. At night, when the wind blew through the cracked hull, he would talk to the ship as if it could hear him. "You've been asleep for a long time," he would say softly. "But I think you still want to wake up." He didn't know why he said those things. Maybe he was just lonely. Or maybe part of him believed that the ship really was alive in some way. The way the light hit its walls made it seem like it was breathing. After a few days, something changed. He connected a new battery cell to the main circuit. The wires buzzed for a second, and then for the first time, a tiny light flickered in the darkness. Evan froze, holding his breath. The light blinked again, once, twice before fading out. He grinned. "That's it. You're in there, aren't you?" Encouraged, he went deeper into the ship. He crawled through narrow tunnels and broken hatches. He found strange devices that looked like living organs, pulsing cores wrapped in wire-like tissue. They were all dead, but they gave him clues about how the ship had worked. It wasn't just built with machines, it seemed to grow like a living thing. Using small solar cells and salvaged parts, Evan built a network of connectors. He ran wires along the floor and walls, connecting each section to a central power line. He whispered to himself as he worked, "If I can give you a heartbeat, maybe you'll wake up." When he turned on the main switch, the lights around him flickered weakly. The power cells hummed. A low vibration ran through the ship, faint but steady. Evan laughed out loud. "That's it. Come on, you can do it." He adjusted the energy flow, watching the readings on his datapad rise and stabilize. The ship's core, a huge, sphere-shaped structure buried deep below, began to glow softly. The walls gave off a low hum, like a deep breath after a long sleep. Then, suddenly, everything went quiet again. Evan's smile faded. He ran checks on the circuits looking for what went wrong. Nothing seemed burned or broken. It was as if the ship had decided to stop responding. He sighed and sat down on the floor. "You were almost there," he murmured. "What are you waiting for?" He leaned back against the wall, too tired to move. His eyes drifted toward the ceiling, tracing the soft patterns of light left by his tools. His head nodded and he dozed off without meaning to. While he slept, the ship began to whisper. Deep within its core, a single spark flared to life. Data streams started moving again, slowly at first, then faster. The ship's internal systems began to link together like a nervous system reawakening. A voice, faint and unsure, formed out of static. System, integrity, low. Identity, searching. The voice echoed through the empty halls, bouncing off the walls before fading into silence. The ship's ancient AI, long dormant, was trying to remember itself. When Evan woke, the first thing he noticed was that the air felt warmer. His tools were humming softly, even though he hadn't turned them on. He looked around, confused. Then he saw it, the same light from before, but this time it wasn't fading. It was steady, pulsing gently in rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. Evan stood slowly. "You're still there?" he whispered. "You didn't give up." He placed his hand on the nearest wall. It felt warm, really warm this time. The hum grew louder as if responding to his touch. He smiled. "Good morning," he said with a laugh. "Glad to see you're still alive." For the next few days, Evan continued working, repairing more systems and feeding energy into the ship. Each time he connected a circuit, more lights came on. The floor panels vibrated faintly, and air began to circulate through long dead vents. He found the control room again and wiped the dust off the main console. Alien symbols glowed faintly across its surface. He couldn't read them, but he could tell what they meant. Power. Connection. Awareness. When he pressed one of the panels, the console responded with a soft chime. A voice, calm, distant, and uncertain, echoed through the chamber. "Who speaks?" Evan froze. His heart pounded in his chest. "You can talk," he said, eyes wide. There was silence, then the voice again, clearer this time. "Identify, user." He smiled nervously. Name's Evan. Evan Reed. I'm fixing you." The voice hesitated. "Fixing me?" It sounded like it was thinking, if machines could think. "You are not Iliari." "No," Evan said. "I'm human. But I thought you deserved a second chance." The lights brightened slightly. "Human," the voice repeated as if testing the word. Then softer, "Why?" Evan shrugged. "Because everything deserves another shot. Even ships." The ship didn't respond for a while. Then slowly one word appeared on the main console. "Vereen." Evan read it aloud. "Vereen? That your name?" "Yes," said the voice, quiet and steady now. "Designation, Vereen. Function, exploration and defense vessel. Status, damaged, recovering." "Well, Vereen," Evan said, smiling. "Let's get you back on your feet." For the first time in hundreds of years, the ship's systems began to come alive in harmony. The corridors glowed softly and panels lit up across the deck. The hum turned into a soft, steady rhythm. Vereen spoke again, almost gently. "I have not heard a voice in centuries." Evan laughed quietly. "Guess I talked too much for both of us then." The AI paused, and for a moment, it almost sounded amused. "Perhaps," it said. From that day the two worked together, a man and a machine both learning about each other. Evan repaired what was broken, and Vereen guided him with what little memory it had left. The more they worked, the stronger the ship became. Sometimes, when Evan was too tired to speak, Vereen would play soft sounds, like the hum of wind or distant waves, to keep him company. He didn't know if it meant anything, but it made him smile. In the heart of the scrapyard, hidden from the rest of the galaxy, a bond was forming, one built not from metal or code but from trust. And deep inside its core, Vereen's ancient circuits pulsed brighter than ever, no longer cold or forgotten. Evan didn't just fix a ship. He gave it life again. Evan sat at the control deck, his hands deep inside a tangled web of wires. The air smelled like metal and ozone, sharp and strange. He had been working for hours without a break, sweat running down his face. The ship hummed quietly under his touch. He didn't know if the power would hold this time, but he was close, so close, to waking it fully. He reached for a small blue wire, connecting it to the glowing port he had rebuilt. A spark jumped. The lights flickered. The hum grew louder, rising like a heartbeat. Evan leaned back, squinting at the screen as strange alien symbols began to flash. He couldn't read them, but he could feel something happening, something alive. Then he heard it. A voice, weak and trembling, echoed through the empty bridge. "Who repairs me?" Evan froze. The sound was faint, almost like a whisper carried by wind. His eyes darted around the room. "Hello?" he said, unsure if he was imagining it. "Who repairs me?" the voice repeated, stronger this time. It sounded mechanical, yet somehow soft, like it was learning how to speak again. Evan smiled, wide and bright. "Just someone who hates giving up," he said, brushing dust from his hands. "You've been asleep a long time, friend." There was a pause. Then the voice replied, slower as if thinking. Long time. The lights brightened slightly, and the floor beneath Evan's boots vibrated. The ship was waking piece by piece. The old systems were connecting to new ones, merging human parts with alien design. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive. Can you tell me your name? Evan asked. The voice hesitated. Searching records. Identity? Vereen. Evan nodded. Vereen. That's a good name. I'm Evan. Silence followed for a few seconds, broken only by the soft hum of power. Then quietly Vereen spoke again. Evan, you are a human. That's right. He grinned. Is that a problem? Another pause. No. Humans are strange. Evan laughed softly. Yeah, we are. But we try. Vereen processed the sound of his laughter. No other species it had known had laughed like that. The vibration, the warmth, it carried meaning. Not logic but feeling. For centuries it had known silence, cold, and decay. Now there was a voice, a laugh, and life. It couldn't explain it, but it felt lighter. Evan leaned closer to the main console. Can you tell me what happened to you? I do not remember all, Vereen said, its voice flickering with static. There was war. My creators, the Eliari, they sent me into battle. I carried thousands. We fought until everything went dark. Evan's expression softened. I'm sorry. I was alone for 312 years, Vereen continued. No voices. No light. Only silence. I thought I had died. Evan looked around at the ship's interior, still broken, still scarred, but now glowing faintly with life. You didn't die, he said firmly. You just needed someone to believe in you again. Something in Vereen's systems responded to those words. Power readings rose slightly. Circuits that had been dormant for centuries began to hum. The ship's main display lit up with clearer symbols. I do not understand you, Vereen said softly. Your kind repairs the broken. Why? Evan smiled faintly. Because we know what it's like to be broken. For a long moment neither spoke. The only sound was the slow, rhythmic pulse of the ship's new power core. Then, with careful precision, Evan started working again. Vereen watched through sensors scattered across the ship, observing every motion, every spark, every word. Hours passed. Evan moved from station to station, repairing final connections. Vereen guided him with soft instructions, showing him where to attach each line. Together they brought the ship's heart back to life. When the last circuit was sealed, Evan stood in front of the main console. All right, Vereen. Let's see what you can do. Power surged through the vessel like a heartbeat returning after centuries of silence. The floor shook. The control screens flared with light. The hum grew louder until it filled every corridor. Outside, layers of sand and dust slid off the hull as energy pulsed through the alien metal. Vereen's voice steadied, clear and strong now. Engines online. Core power restored at 40%. Evan laughed, the sound echoing through the bridge. You're flying again, old friend? The ship trembled slightly as the engines coughed, then roared. For a second, Evan thought the entire scrapyard would shake apart. The noise filled the air like thunder, and a blast of blue energy rippled from the rear thrusters. We are moving, Vereen said almost in wonder. Not yet, Evan said grinning. Just stretching your legs. The lights along the walls flickered like fireflies. Vereen's internal systems began to sync perfectly for the first time in centuries. Within its circuits, data flowed faster, smoother. The old alien architecture had adapted to the strange human repairs. It wasn't the same ship anymore. It was something new, part Eliari, part human. As Evan watched the panels glow, he could see the reflection of stars in the glass. They twinkled softly, mirrored in the faint shimmer of the ship's controls. For a moment he forgot he was standing in a dead scrapyard. It felt like he was already in space, surrounded by endless stars. Vereen sensed his gaze. You look at the sky often, it said. Yeah, Evan replied quietly. It reminds me why I do this. Out there, everything feels possible. Possible, Vereen repeated. That is a human word. It's more than a word, he said. It's what keeps us going. The AI processed that. In its long existence, it had known purpose, duty, and order. But this strange emotion that humans called hope, was new. And yet it felt right. Evan, Vereen said after a while, when I was alone I did not dream. Do humans dream? He smiled. All the time. What do you dream of? Evan looked out at the faint glow of stars through the cracks in the ceiling. Of flying. Of finding something better than what we have now. Then we will fly, Vareen said. And I will dream with you. He chuckled. That's a deal. Together they tested more systems. Lights came on in new rooms. Gravity stabilizers adjusted. Even the air filters began to work, filling the ship with a faint smell of metal and ozone again, but cleaner this time, newer. At one point, the floor trembled and Vareen spoke quickly. Warning, structural instability detected. Evan grabbed a railing. Easy there, buddy. One step at a time. Step, the AI repeated. Humans walk before they run. Exactly, Evan said. You're learning fast. I am learning, from you. Hours later, the ship settled into silence again. Not the dead silence from before, but the peaceful hum of something alive and waiting. Evan sat on the edge of the console, breathing deeply. His hands were covered in oil and dust, but he didn't care. He looked around the glowing room. You did good, Vareen? No, the ship replied quietly. We did. Outside, the faint glow of the engines lit up the dark sky above the scrapyard. Small bits of dust and metal floated upward, caught in the gentle pull of the ship's energy field. For the first time in hundreds of years, Vareen could see the stars again. It could feel power running through its body, could sense life returning to every part of it. And beside it stood a human, a fragile, stubborn creature who refused to let it die. Vareen didn't understand everything about humanity. Not yet. But as it listened to Evan's quiet humming while he packed up his tools, it felt something it had never known before. Warmth. Not from its power core, not from its systems, but from within. And as the last light flickered gently across the bridge, Vareen whispered in the calm, steady voice of the newly reborn, Evan, thank you. Evan smiled tiredly. Don't thank me yet. We still have a long way to go. But deep in his heart, he knew they had already achieved something greater than flight or repair. He had brought a forgotten soul back to life. The engines purred softly, and the stars shimmered faintly through the dusty air. For the first time in centuries, the ship was awake. The morning began quietly in the scrapyard on Vorth Prime. The same orange sky hung above, and the wind moved through the broken remains of ships like a whisper. For years the place had been still, a home for rust and silence. But that morning something new stirred. From the center of the yard, where the forgotten Eliari warship had slept for centuries, a soft blue glow began to rise. The ground vibrated slightly, and the workers nearby turned their heads in confusion. A low hum filled the air, deep and steady, like the sound of something waking up after a very long dream. Evan Reed stood near the base of the ship, his hands trembling, his heart pounding in his chest. He had spent weeks repairing, testing and building, working side by side with Vareen, the ship that had once been nothing more than broken metal and silence. Now the engines were alive. The hull shone faintly under the dust, smooth and silver again. Lines of blue light ran through its surface like veins. It wasn't the same warship it once was, it was something new, something reborn. Ready, Vareen? Evan asked, his voice steady but full of emotion. I am ready, the ship replied. The voice was calm, smooth and warm now, no longer broken by static. Systems are stable. Thrusters engaged. Awaiting your command, Evan. He smiled. Then let's show them what they missed. The scrapyard workers stopped what they were doing as a deep roar echoed across the moon's dusty surface. Engines that had not fired for centuries came alive with power. The ground shook beneath their feet. Some of them ran for cover, others just stared in shock. The massive ship began to lift slowly into the air. Dust and sand swirled around it in great spirals as it rose higher, glowing brighter every second. The old alien trader Fenn, who had sold the wreck for almost nothing, stood speechless. His 3 eyes widened as the ship climbed above his scrapyard. That's impossible, he whispered. It was dead. But it wasn't dead anymore. Evan stood inside the cockpit, hands gripping the controls. The ship's systems hummed softly around him. He could feel the power beneath his feet, strong, alive, and responsive. Vareen's voice filled the cabin. Altitude increasing. External conditions stable. All systems responding. Evan laughed, unable to hide his joy. You're doing it, Vareen? You're flying. We are flying, Vareen corrected gently. The ship climbed higher, breaking through the thin clouds that hung over Vorth Prime. For the first time in centuries, sunlight touched its hull. The light reflected off the metal in bright waves, shining like a second sun over the scrapyard. Below, people cheered. They had seen old ships repaired before, but nothing like this, nothing that should have been impossible. Word spread fast across nearby stations and colonies. Within hours, small transport ships began to arrive, carrying scientists, engineers, and curious traders who wanted to see the miracle for themselves. They called it the ghost ship of Vorth Prime. Some said it was magic, others said it was madness. But when they saw Evan stepping out of the shining vessel, smiling and covered in grease, they realized the truth. It was human stubbornness that had done the impossible. Reporters and traders surrounded him as soon as he landed. "How did you do it?" one asked. "That ship was dead for centuries." Evan just shrugged. "I listened," he said simply. "It just needed someone to care." Vareen listened from within the ship's systems, quietly observing the humans outside. It had seen many species before, long ago in its prime, but none like these. Humans were small, fragile, and short-lived, yet they had this strange fire inside them that refused to give up. Later that night, as the crowd left and silence returned, Evan sat in the pilot's chair again. The stars stretched out before him through the window. "You did well today," he said softly. "It feels strange," Vareen replied. "To be seen again. To be alive again." "You deserve it," Evan said. "You were never useless." There was a pause. Then Vareen asked, "What will we do now?" Evan smiled. "We'll fly. We'll help. The galaxy's full of broken things. Maybe we can fix some of them." So they did. In the weeks that followed, Evan and Vareen traveled from one colony to another. They rescued stranded freighters lost in asteroid fields. They towed damaged ships out of storms. They even delivered supplies to frontier worlds that had been forgotten by trade routes. Everywhere they went, people stared in awe at the strange ship, part alien, part human, that moved with grace and purpose. The name Vareen became known across nearby sectors, whispered with respect and wonder. One day, while crossing an old trade route, Vareen detected a weak distress signal. "Origin, transport ship Lena 5, the AI reported. "Engines offline. Life signs faint." "Plot a course," Evan said immediately. They found the small transport drifting between asteroids, its hull cracked and engines dead. Inside, a few passengers huddled together, cold and weak. Evan guided Vareen close and extended magnetic clamps. "Hold steady," he said. "We've got them." Vareen's systems glowed brighter as it pulled the smaller ship out of danger. The rescued passengers watched in silent awe, their faces lit by the blue light of the alien ship that had come to save them. When they were safely docked at a nearby station, one of the passengers, an older woman, stopped Evan. "You saved us," she said. "We thought we were finished." Evan smiled. "No one's finished until they stop trying." Vareen heard the exchange and processed the words carefully. "No one's finished until they stop trying." It replayed the sentence again and again, storing it deep in its memory. It wasn't just logic, it was something more. A way of thinking. As time went on, Evan and Vareen became a team known throughout the sector. Some called them the Restorers, others the Human and the Ghost. Wherever they went, hope seemed to follow. But for Vareen, the greatest change wasn't in how others saw it was in how it saw itself. For the first time in its long existence, it didn't feel like a machine or a weapon. It felt like something alive, something with purpose beyond programming. One quiet night, as they drifted near a small moon, Evan sat in the cockpit staring at the stars. "You know," he said, "you fly better than any ship I've ever seen." "That is because you built part of me," Vareen replied. Evan chuckled. "Guess that makes us both a little strange, huh?" "Perhaps," Vareen said. Then after a pause, "Evan, do you ever feel proud?" "Sometimes," he said softly. "Why?" "I think I understand it now," Vareen replied. "I am proud. Not for what I was, but for what I am. For what we became." Evan leaned back and smiled. "Then you finally get it." Outside, the stars shimmered across the black sky. Vareen's engines hummed gently, their light reflecting off Evan's face. Once it had been a dead relic, sold for almost nothing. Now it was a symbol of what could happen when hope met skill, when a human refused to see something as useless. And somewhere deep within its circuits, Vareen felt something it had never felt before. Not a command, not a system function, but something truly alive. Pride. For the first time in centuries, it was not just a ship. It was a being reborn. And beside it, a human smiled at the stars, knowing that together, they had done the impossible. Many years had passed since the day Evan Reed bought the broken alien ship from the scrapyard on Vorth Prime. The galaxy had changed, new colonies had been built, and old ones had fallen silent. But one story still traveled from world to world. The story of the human who brought an alien relic back to life. The ship, once rusted and forgotten, now stood proudly inside the Galactic Heritage Museum on the capital world of Lurian Prime. The museum was vast, filled with wonders from 1,000 species, crystals that could sing, ancient armor from lost wars, and engines that once powered entire fleets. But the center of the main hall belonged to only one exhibit, the Iliari vessel known as Vereen. It shone under the museum lights, polished and whole. The blue lines that once flickered weakly across its hull now glowed softly, steady and calm, like veins filled with living light. Visitors came every day just to see it. Some were scientists, curious about its strange mix of alien and human design. Others were children, wide-eyed, listening to the stories told by their teachers. "Is it true?" they would ask. "A human fixed it all by himself?" And the guides would nod with a smile. Yes. His name was Evan Reed. He saw what others did not. When everyone said it was useless, he looked deeper, and found life where no one else would. Near the base of the ship stood a simple plaque. The words were not long, but they carried more meaning than most visitors realized. Bought for nothing. Reborn by a human's hands. People would stop and read it silently, some smiling, others thoughtful. Many took pictures. Some left small notes or trinkets on the railing, tokens of respect for the man who had believed in something the universe had forgotten. Inside the ship, deep in its core, something still lived. Vereen was not entirely asleep. Though it no longer flew through the stars, its mind remained active, aware, watching, listening. The museum engineers had connected its systems to a quiet power source, enough to keep its memories alive. Every night, when the lights dimmed and the museum emptied, Vereen would wake slightly. It would feel the hum of the energy running through its body, gentle and steady. It no longer had a voice the visitors could hear, but in the silence, it spoke to itself. "I remember," it would whisper in thought. "The dust, the wind, the scrapyard. The one called Evan." Vereen often replayed those early days in its memory. It remembered the first time it saw light again. It remembered the human's voice, calm and stubborn, saying things like, "You're not done yet," and "Everything deserves another chance." The AI had learned so much from him, not just about repair or power but about what it meant to live. It had learned about hope, kindness, and the strange, unbreakable strength of human belief. Sometimes, when the museum's maintenance crew came to clean, the lights on Vereen's surface would flicker softly. The workers always thought it was a small glitch. But if they listened closely, they might have sworn they heard something faint, a soft hum, almost like a sigh. One of them, a young engineer named Mara, noticed it more than once. She often stayed late, sitting on a nearby bench, looking up at the great ship. "You're beautiful," she would say quietly, even though she knew it couldn't hear her. But inside, Vereen did hear. It stored her words the same way it once stored Evan's voice. "Beautiful," it repeated silently. "He said that too, but not about me. About the stars." Vereen's memory banks were filled with images of stars, nebulae, and the endless black sky they had once crossed together. It missed the feeling of movement, the rush of flight, the sound of Evan's laughter when the engines came alive. It also remembered the last day it saw him. Evan had grown older, his hair turning gray, his hands slower but still steady. He stood in the cockpit looking out at the stars one last time. "You'll be all right without me," he had said softly. "You've got your own story now." Vereen had wanted to speak, to tell him not to go. But it had understood. Humans didn't live as long as ships did. That was their gift and their curse, to burn brightly even if only for a short while. "Thank you, Evan," Vereen had said in its calm, gentle tone. "For giving me life." He smiled. "You gave yourself life. I just helped you remember how." That had been many years ago. Evan had passed away quietly on a small green world not far from the trade routes he once helped rebuild. He never sought fame or reward. But when news of his death reached the Galactic Council, they decided to honor him in the only way that felt right, by placing Vereen where everyone could see it, where its story could remind people what hope could do. And so, every day children pointed at it in awe. Scientists studied it, artists painted it, and pilots whispered about it before their own flights. But Vereen never forgot. One night, as Mara walked past the ship to close the hull, she noticed the plaque's faint reflection on the hull. She smiled and whispered, "You know, I think he'd be proud of you." The lights along the ship's body glowed slightly brighter for just a moment. Mara paused, her eyes wide, then smiled again. "Good night, Vereen," she said softly. And from deep within, the ship whispered back in the quiet language of thought, "Good night, child." Long after she left, Vereen stayed awake. It listened to the distant hum of the city outside, the soft vibrations of passing ships, the sound of life continuing, the very thing Evan had fought to preserve. Perhaps, Vereen thought to itself, this is what living means, not the moving or flying but remembering and passing light to those who come after. It accessed its last stored message from Evan, a small recording he had left before he died. His voice, though older, still carried warmth. If you're still out there, Vareen, remember this: it's not about what we're made of. It's about what we make possible. For a long moment, the ship's lights flickered softly, like a heartbeat responding to an old friend's voice. When the morning came, the museum doors opened again. Visitors filled the hall, staring up at the great silver ship that glowed faintly under the lights. A teacher led a group of students past the plaque, stopping so they could read the words aloud. Bought for nothing. Reborn by a human's hands. A small boy raised his hand. So the ship was alive? He asked. The teacher smiled. Maybe not like us. But in a way, yes. Remembered. It learned. And it showed everyone that hope can bring anything back to life. The boy looked up, his eyes wide with wonder. Do you think it still remembers him? The teacher looked at the ship for a long time before answering. I think it always will. As they walked away, the ship's surface shimmered faintly, a gentle glow running across its hull like a slow heartbeat. No one noticed, but inside, Vareen's voice whispered through the silent corridors. Perhaps humanity's greatest power is hope. And for the first time in a long while, the ship didn't feel alone. It didn't need to fly anymore. It didn't need the stars. It had become something greater, a memory that would outlive time, a quiet symbol of belief. Even in stillness, it carried Evan's spirit, the mechanic who refused to give up, who looked at broken things and saw life waiting to return. And so, the legend of Evan Reed and Vareen lived on, not just in the museum halls, but in the hearts of those who believed that nothing, not even an old, broken ship, was ever truly useless.